This video is brought to you by True Tales of Buried Treasure, the largest collection of old treasure magazines in the West. On our website, you can search for individual treasure stories by region, or buy our original magazines themselves. To pay us a visit, please click on the link in the description. Enjoy. Many moons passed in the days of the gold rush on Yukon's icy frontier. An aged prospector penned 4 immortal lines. The Yukon nights are bright and cold, but a sourdough never minds it. I'd sell my soul for a poke of gold if I could only find it. In those few words, the Yukon bard captured the spirit of adventurers who risked all, even life, in their pursuit of the precious yellow metal. Across the snow-capped peaks of the Andes, beyond Ecuador's rainforest, lies an uncharted jungle wilderness. Rivers laden with gold flow through this treacherous land, a forbidden realm guarded by the savage Aucas. These fierce tribesmen first crossed paths with Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century, who sought riches and tortured the Aucas for their secrets. Unable to conquer, the invaders retreated, leaving the gold and jewels for future explorers. Decades later, British and American adventurers braved the tales of treasure, venturing into this perilous territory. In the year 1935, Esin Lock, a noble Scotsman and renowned explorer, found himself in Ecuador. With a government commission in hand, Lock set out to map the treacherous Rio Napo region, home to the savage Auca territory. Leading the Andes Amazon expedition, he embarked on a perilous journey aboard 2 balsa wood rafts, laden with equipment weighing 5 tons. For 2 long years, Lock and his group delved into this uncharted land. Despite facing repeated attacks from the Aucas, they managed to fend off disaster with their heavy firepower. Lock's mapping efforts proved invaluable, as the Napo region had remained virtually unexplored until then. His detailed map of the area still stands as the finest ever compiled. During their time in Auca territory, Lock's expedition endured months of hostility. However, their resilience paid off, as Lock returned to Quito with bags of gold nuggets and rough metal. This triumph reignited the spirit of adventure in those who sought to conquer this forbidden land in search of untold riches. Tragically, Lock's aspirations of returning for more gold were cut short. Afflicted by a cancerous condition in his throat, he ultimately met his demise at his own hand. His nephew, Alistair, who had accompanied him on the dangerous expedition, now resides in Sydney, Australia, with plans to venture back to Ecuador one day for a new expedition. Inspired by Lock's remarkable achievements, an audacious American adventurer named Sam Sauter built a modest house on the banks of the Napo River, near Auca territory. His aim was to establish friendly relations with the indigenous people and seek permission to pan the rivers. Each night, Sam left a variety of gifts at the edge of a clearing on his hacienda. Machetes and brightly colored ribbons for the women were among his offerings, in hopes of winning the Auca's favor. Several nights passed and his gifts vanished, fueling his optimism. Sam eagerly awaited a friendly visit from his primitive neighbors, sitting on his veranda during daylight hours. One fateful day his expectations were met, but not in the manner he had envisioned. Out of the tall grass, a mere few yards from his porch, 3 nude Auca warriors emerged, wielding their deadly 8-foot-long lances. Unfortunately, the aging American had left his gun in the house, and he expected to be killed instantly. But suddenly an idea struck him, one that he hoped might prolong his life, at least until he could get through the front door to retrieve his gun. Sam wore false teeth, and in a desperate moment, took them from his mouth, held them between his thumb and forefinger, and began clacking them up and down at the startled Aucas. This act probably saved his life, as the Indians took off for the jungle. But the very next morning, Sam Sauter packed his gear and headed back to civilization across the Napo River. He wasn't taking any more chances, and the gold in the rivers still remained untouched and inviolate. But even as Sauter fled to safety, another American explorer, Bancroft Butler, who had originally come to Ecuador on a herpetology expedition for the University of Detroit, set off with 3 Ecuadorians down the Nushino River in the very heart of Auca territory. His guide on this expedition was Severo Vargas, well known as King of the Rivers and an expert on Auca habits and customs. "We were gone about 3 months," Butler recently told me, "and during that time never saw a single Auca, possibly because we were heavily armed and prepared for any eventuality." Since then, Butler has been on many other expeditions in this vicinity and is still as enthusiastic as ever about the possibility of reaping a rich reward in gold and other precious metals in this area. "As we passed slowly downstream," he said, "the yellow glint of gold coming from the many playas, or beaches, was visible, but we felt that the appropriate time to make a killing still remained in the future." According to Butler, within the next year or two, properly equipped expeditions will be able to work the rivers, both by panning and by using heavy equipment, without any danger of attack. "It's just a question of time," he remarked, "until these savages recognize that the inroads of civilization into their land cannot stop it." But all expeditions were not as successful or fruitful as Bancroft Butler's. A few years later, a trio of daring adventurers embarked on a quest for fortune and excitement. Peterson, a mysterious European photographer, joined forces with Kurt Bosak, a Danish explorer and author, as well as the young American Ralph Darlington. With the aid of Yumbo Indians as guides and porters, they ventured down the treacherous Rio Nushino in search of gold, emeralds, and the thrill of the unknown. As they delved deeper into the territory of the formidable Aucas, they hoped for a peaceful encounter, but their hopes were shattered when chaos erupted. The first raft, under Peterson's command, approached a bend in the narrow river. A fallen tree blocked their path, funneling them within striking distance of an ambush. With horror, Peterson spotted a group of 8 Aucas, armed with deadly saw-toothed lances, waiting to attack. The savages wasted no time, hurling their lethal weapons at the unsuspecting explorers. Tragedy struck as one of the Yumbo Indians fell, pierced through the chest by a savage lance. Another was wounded in the heel. In the face of this onslaught, Peterson and his comrades leaped into the safety of the river, using the raft as a shield against the relentless barrage of lances. The second raft joined them, and together they fought back. Bosak and Darlington unleashed sticks of dynamite, causing the Aucas to scatter in fear. With their supplies abandoned, the men swam across the river, beginning a hasty retreat on foot towards civilization. In the midst of their escape, Darlington marveled at the tantalizing glimpses of gold in the river's waters, igniting a spark of hope for future expeditions. However, not all who ventured into Auca territory sought riches. In 1956, a group of North American Protestants, known as Christian Missions in Many Lands, aimed to bring Christianity to these savage lands. After months of reconnaissance, they located an Auca village and sent 5 young missionaries to establish contact: Nathaniel Saint, Edward McCulley, James Elliott, Peter Fleming, and Roger Udarian. Tragically, all of them were ruthlessly murdered despite valiant rescue efforts. For centuries, the Aucas had fiercely guarded their territory, attacking any intruders while sparing the Yumbo Indian villages beyond their borders. But in 1962, driven by hunger or a scarcity of women, small groups of Aucas began crossing the Napo River, breaching the long-standing divide between their realm and the outside world. They indiscriminately attacked settlements and villages, leaving a trail of death and destruction in their wake. These brutal raids forced thousands of colonists to abandon their homes and seek refuge in larger fortified settlements nearer to civilization. In May of 1964, the Aucas once again crossed the Napo, launching a deadly assault on the village of Koka. This humble settlement consisted of palm-thatched huts, a small Capuchin mission, and a population of Yumbo Indians. Under the cover of night, the Aucas unleashed their fury, impaling several Yumbo warriors with their lethal lances. Amidst the chaos, a remarkable occurrence took place. One Auca, a young woman, was captured during the battle. Reports spoke of her fierce resistance, fighting with the same zeal as her male counterparts. She was handed over to the Capuchin mission, where the nuns clothed her in a calico dress, obscuring her nudity. Like other Aucas, she adorned her ears with massive balsa wood earplugs, a symbol of her tribal identity in a world of violence and uncertainty. The nuns at the Capuchin mission captured a female Auca warrior during the battle with the Yumbo Indians, Despite the Padres' attempts to communicate with her, she remained silent. The language barrier hindered any meaningful conversation since the Padres had not learned the Auca's language and she couldn't speak any other dialect. To protect the villagers, troops were deployed to the area, forcing the Aucas to seek out new regions for their occasional attacks. These primitive people, much like their ancestors, the Incas, view gold as a religious symbol rather than a commodity. The unexplored territory they inhabit is dotted with numerous rivers, including the Payamino, Mandaro, Koka, Aguarico, Shiripuno, and Curaray. The gold found in any of these rivers alone could make the Aucas one of the wealthiest tribes in South America. Adventurous individuals who successfully work even a small section of these rivers can amass a fortune that would satisfy even the greediest gold hunter. Dr. Heinz Bieber, a geologist and seasoned explorer, has spent the last 20 years in South America, searching for gold and other minerals in the remote jungle areas. He and a group of armed Yumbo Indians embarked on a mining expedition on the Curaray River, estimating an average gold content of $3 to $7 per cubic yard. In the region they worked, there were approximately 600,000 cubic yards, pointing to an immense fortune waiting to be unearthed. Additionally, the jungle area holds other treasures, including precious stones like aquamarines, morganites, amethysts, topazes, and agates. Dr. Bieber laughed off concerns about the Aucas and their attacks, considering them overrated. He believed that the Aucas rarely attacked in large numbers, usually limited to 3, 6, or at most 12 individuals. Aware of the presence of outsiders, the Aucas would retreat into the bush rather than engage in direct confrontation. During their months on the Curaray River, Dr. Bieber's group never encountered a single Indian, only coming across their trails. Dr. Bieber shared his knowledge about the Aucas, describing them as nomadic people who live in small, isolated groups along the riverbanks in bamboo huts. He estimated that there are around 800 Aucas in the region, considering their vast territory of nearly 50,000 square miles. According to Dr. Bieber, their only weapon is an 8-foot-long saw-toothed lance, and they are afraid of gunfire. Dr. Bieber filed for a gold concession in the Curaray region and has garnered interest from a large British mining corporation. Plans are underway to bring in heavy-duty dredges and mining equipment for the rivers in the area, which are known to be highly mineralized with gold, silver, copper, and other precious metals. However, Dr. Bieber advised against going into Auca territory in search of gold, as it can be dangerous. There are still numerous rivers outside of Auca territory available for amateur treasure hunters, with little to no danger involved. But I was still unconvinced. I wanted to take a trip into Auca territory for two specific reasons. Was there really gold in these rivers in the quantity Dr. Bieber suggested? And just how dangerous were the Aucas? To that end, I flew to Tena, capital of the province of Napo Pastaza in Ecuador's rainforest, and contacted a good friend of mine, Fausto Rueda. I had heard indirectly that his father, Juan, together with a group of Yumbo Indians, was panning gold on the Conuaco River deep in Auca territory. Once a week, the group returned to Tena for new supplies and to sell their gold. Fortunately, I had arrived over a weekend and found Fausto's father in the village. He readily gave me permission to join him on his return trip. Before the break of dawn, our Johnson outboards roared to life, and in the dim light, Juan Rueda and his motley crew of desperate-looking Javaro and Yumbo Indians loaded into 3 canoes, eager for adventure and gold. Fausto decided to join us at the last minute, and we hopped into the 3rd canoe, which he deemed slightly safer. It's a known fact that in an Auca ambush, it's the first boat that bears the brunt of the attack. 3 hours after leaving Puerto Napo, we entered a small tributary and proceeded eastward through a maze of rivers and streams, which eventually brought us into the Cononaco. Had I not realized I was in Auca terrain, I think I might have enjoyed the trip. The jungle has an aura of deceptive beauty and an overpowering loneliness. The possibility of an unexpected encounter was always at the forefront of my mind, and I couldn't help but notice the vigilance of the Indians in our canoe. They kept their guns ready, scanning the dense foliage for any signs of movement. They weren't taking any chances. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, we arrived at the camp on the playa. It was a humble settlement with a few palm-thatched shelters where the men slept. Cooking was done over open fires by the river's edge. We quickly unloaded the canoes and prepared for the night. As dusk fell, we hastily ate a meal of rice, yucca, bananas, and freshly caught fish. With the darkness enveloping the jungle, our leader Juan, wise in the ways of the wilderness, positioned 10 of our Indians in a protective semicircle around the camp. In case of an attack, a single shot would be fired, signaling the rest of us to grab our guns and take cover in a circular trench dug in the sand. From there, we would be shielded from the deadly lances of the Aucas and capable of defending against any sudden raid. Sentries took shifts of 4 hours, ensuring constant watchfulness. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I found myself in the trench with Fausto and other yumbos. Armed with rifles, albeit not the most modern ones, the Indians were ready to make some noise if needed. I carried my trusty Colt 45. Lying in the shallow ditch, facing the mysterious jungle, we kept our senses sharp, listening for any unusual sounds. The night air was filled with the cacophony of nocturnal birds, and occasionally, the distant roar of a jaguar echoed through the darkness. Suddenly, Fausto nudged me, his elbow digging into my ribs. "Listen," he whispered urgently. I strained my ears, trying to discern the source of his concern, but all I could hear were the cries of the birds. Yet, there seemed to be more of them now. First, the calls emerged from the deep jungle to our right. Then they were answered from the opposite direction. "The Aucas," Fausto murmured, his voice barely audible. "They use bird calls to communicate among themselves." However, that night, nothing transpired. At the break of dawn, we left the trench and returned to camp. When I asked Juan about the bird calls, he simply chuckled and said, "Of course they were Aucas. They do that every night. 2 weeks ago, they hurled some lances at us, but no one was harmed. We scared them away with our rifles, and they haven't bothered us since." After breakfast, most of the men armed themselves with shiny tin pans and headed to the riverbank. They peered into the sunlit water, hoping to catch a gleam of gold, a sign of the precious metal's presence. I walked alongside Juan, an experienced prospector who knew the tricks of the trade. Every so often, he would halt and point his weathered finger toward the river's edge. "See that glimmer?" he remarked. "That's flake gold. It's a promising spot for panning, but we'll come back to it later. Along certain pockets of the riverbank, gold has a way of getting trapped, resulting in much greater findings." 10 minutes later, we arrived at one such pocket, and I couldn't contain my amazement. The shallow water, only about 2 feet deep, shimmered with a golden glow. "Now watch," Juan said, rolling up his trousers and stepping into the water. He filled his pan with the sand, swirling it gently to remove any twigs, leaves, or debris. Gradually, the contents of the pan transformed, revealing dozens of radiant gold particles and nuggets. Some were as small as pinheads, while others were as large as walnuts. Now at long last, I was finally convinced. The gold was here all right, and obviously in great quantities, but unfortunately, it took a veritable army of well-equipped men to recover it. In spite of the fact that gold was in the rivers and that 10 Indians continuously guarded those who panned, the air was electric with excitement, and all of us secretly kept our eyes on the perimeter of the jungle. That night, Juan collected the gold from all the workers and poured it into small leather sacks. His share was 50% of everything recovered, and the balance was divided equally among the others upon their return to Puerto Napo. All of them, without a doubt, were earning more money than they ever had before. But in my opinion, they deserved every penny of it. This was definitely no adventurous lark, but a continuous struggle against a silent foe who, given the right opportunity, could annihilate all of us. At the end of the week, we returned to Puerto Napo, and Juan took with him 12 bags of gold, quite a haul for just 6 days' work. In retrospect, my journey into the Aucas was little different, but perhaps a bit more exciting than other jungle expeditions I had undertaken over the past few years. Dr. Bieber had been right. The gold is in the rivers, and there was little danger from Auca attack as long as we had gone in force and maintained a continuous vigil. I think too that the Aucas will eventually become accustomed to the presence of strangers in their midst, and perhaps will confine their raids to small pueblos outside their own territory. I am convinced that someday a successful and friendly contact will be made with these savages, which will permit an exchange of trade goods and various staples for their gold. But for the time being, this is not for amateur prospectors or rockhounds who want to go it alone. They should confine their activities to the hundreds of other rivers outside Auca territory. It is not an undertaking that can be accomplished in 2 weeks or a month. It's possible that the Aucas are a diminishing tribe, and that their numbers are steadily decreasing. Leading nomadic lives, they wander through the jungle continuously in search of food, which oftentimes is hard to find. Over the past few years, a half-dozen or more Auca women have escaped and worked their way to Yumbo pueblos where they now live. They vividly described their difficulties obtaining food and asserted that often they were forced to survive on a diet of caterpillars, black beetles, and boiled boa snake. But red-blooded prospectors, rockhounds, and sourdoughs have never been known to be timorous of heart. And one thing is certain, as long as it is remotely possible to retrieve this fabulous fortune from the forbidden rainforest of the Amazon, you may rest assured there will be many who are willing and anxious to pit their intelligence and daring against the primitive cunning of the naked Aucas, guardians of the golden bonanza. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to read the original article or purchase the magazine from which it was taken, please check out our website, truetalesofburiedtreasure.com.